Good morning. We have a quorum and it's the appointed time. I call the meeting to order. The minutes of the last one was the 20th of January. Since the last meeting, 5 papers have been issued by the Secretariat. Any questions? If not, we move on to item 2. Items for discussion at the next meeting. It will take place on the 25th of May, which is a Monday, at 10:45 in the morning. On the list of outstanding items for discussion, you will find 2 proposed items. One is the Lei Yue Mun Waterfront Enhancement Project. The other one is the update on the Hong Kong Disneyland Resort. Any questions? If not, we go to item 3 on the agenda. Permanent setup and staffing proposals of Air Accident Investigation Authority. Mr. Loy Kwok, I just want to ask questions. Then please press the request to speak button. Mr. Siu Ka-fai? Well, you talk about Lei Yue Mun Waterfront Enhancement Project and update on Hong Kong Disneyland Resort in the May meeting. In relation to the update on Hong Kong Disneyland Resort, given the dire operating environment, I don't think there won't be much update. Perhaps we can discuss some other more urgent matters. What's your view then? Well, it's just like the 2020 and 21 work plan of the Tourism Commission. After the epidemic, well, it is the Tourism Board. Maybe it has more urgency than Disneyland. I agree with what Mr. Siu Ka-fai said. Whether it is in relation to incoming visitors or outgoing visitors, well, the Tourism Board has made proposals covering about $400 million. I think we need to discuss it. Any other views? If not, well, I will talk to the relevant parties and maybe juggle the items a little bit. Now, permanent setup and staffing proposals of Air Accident Investigation Authority. Please press the request to speak button. Let's invite the administration to come to join us. We have Mr. Joseph Lai, Permanent Secretary for Transport and Housing, and Mr. Wallace Lau, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Housing, as well as from the Air Accident Investigation Authority, Mr. Leung Man-Fat, Chief Inspector. Mr. Lai? Thank you. Hong Kong is an international aviation hub. We have been operating based on the suggested proposals as well as the standards of ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. In the past, regarding accidents and incidents, it is under the purview of the Civil Aviation Department. There was an amendment in 2016 by the ICAO. They required contracting states to set up an independent air accident investigation authority. In July 2017, with the funding support of the LegCo, we have set up a time-limited non-government service post, which is the Chief Accident and Safety Investigators, pitched at D2. We have started a global recruitment, and in September 2018, we have set up an independent Hong Kong Civil Air Accident Investigation Authority. The non-civil service position was time-limited. Our policy objective has been very clear. We have to set up a permanent, independent Air Accident Investigation Authority. Our main consideration for the time-limited post was to give us flexibility to take stock of our experience, to review the operation and staffing of the temporary organization to see if it meets long-term needs. We have amended the Hong Kong Civil Aviation Investigation of Accidents Regulation Cap 448B. It came into effect in December 2018. So the independence and the statutory power of the authority has been set down. We have reviewed the operation of the authority, and we would like to take the opportunity to consult members and make proposals of the establishment. In relation to the Chief Accident and Safety Investigator, we propose that the time-limited non-civil service position is to be made permanent. Well, the nature of accident and air accident investigation is unique. We think that it would be better for the post to continue to be non-civil service position. This is conducive to identifying person with the right caliber and experience to fill the post. We have taken into consideration the operation of the authority. We need to have someone who is experienced to take up the post as Deputy Chief Accident and Safety Investigator to help lead the authority and to lead investigations. There is one directorate grade in the grade post in the authority. When the person is on leave, the post is filled temporarily by a non-directorate post holder. Taking into account the powers and duties of the position, this arrangement is not ideal. We think that a directorate grade title holder is better to stand in for the chief. Well, for the time-limited non-civil service position has already lapsed on the 31st of March this year. The contract of the first chief investigator expired on the same day. Currently, the authority is headed by the most senior investigator, Mr. Leung Man-fat, who is here with us. If the proposal that is in relation to the chief accident and safety investigator as well as the deputy is supported by members, we will start the open recruitment exercise as soon as possible. However, based on past experience, we think it will take time to complete the recruitment. Given the nature and statutory powers and duty of the CASI, we think that it will not be ideal to have a long gap. That's why we propose a transitional arrangement, taking into account overseas experience, that we propose that under the Transport and Housing Bureau, we will create a supernumerary post pitched at D2 as Assistant Director General of Civil Aviation up to 31st of March 2022. This title holder will report to the Secretary for Transport and Housing. This supernumerary post will lapse when the post of CASI is filled, and it will not be later than the 31st of March 2022. We will identify serving civil servant with experience and expertise to fill the post. And in order to maintain the independency and impartiality of the authority, this title holder will not revert back to the Civil Aviation Department. I would like to also give you some updates. They are not covered by the paper. First, ICAO encourages the regulator of aviation, that is the CAD, and the authority to compile a memorandum of understanding to clearly delineate division of labor as well as powers in the investigation of air accident and to enhance communication. The authority and the CAD, based on their experience in the past year, just signed a memorandum of cooperation. The expertise involved in air accident investigation covers a wide area. We don't expect that the staff of authority will have all the expertise required. We take into account overseas experience. We have started preparation to set up an expert panel to invite experts as well as academics to join. Without conflict of interest, if necessary, they would be consulted in respect of their expertise as necessary. So far, 4 local experts have agreed to sit in the panel. In the future, the authority will continue to enrich the list by inviting local and overseas experts to join. Thank you. Thank you. Now is question and answers session. So far, 6 members, 4 minutes for the time being. First, Mr. Kenneth Leung, and then Ms. Claudia Mo.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I actually am not very satisfied with the work of your department. Well, you mentioned about setting up an AAIA. This is a good idea, and this is also something that contracting state should do. And during that year, you have invited an expert to hold a time-limited post. But now, today, you come to the LegCo and tell us that the contract has expired. And now you ask for an establishment of a temporary position. Well, you should have known that that position would have lapsed by the 31st of March this year. And now this time has passed and there is a vacuum here, and there is such an urgency that you come here today asking for our approval to set up this post. So where is, in these 2 years, where is the independence of this authority? How come you don't have some forward planning? Why didn't you do it 6 months ago? And why do you have to ask a member of the CAD to fill up this post on a temporary basis? This is my question. Now in the CAD, no matter whether you have these signed the MOU, the CAD could have a party that would be investigated by the authority. So it is really not satisfactory to ask someone from the CAD to fill up this post temporarily for 2 years. Well, in fact, in January, we have this agenda item. I'm not talking about January. I'm saying that this should have been planned or discussed before October last year. Yes, Secretary General. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Leung. Well, we are now asking for a temporary the filling of a temporary post, and this person would come from CAD. We know that this is not a satisfactory situation. the independence and neutrality of an institution, it's clearly set out in the regulations and the ordinance. So no matter who will be taking up this position, the person must respect the ordinance and the requirement imposed on him. Chairman, the ordinance is a dead thing. Just like the basic law, well, there are a lot of different interpretations to it. And if you just ask someone from the CAD to head the AAIA on a temporary basis, how can one ensure its neutrality? Well, the legal basis is very important. We also require that the person from CAD, whoever that person may be, to take up this post, he or she could not return to CAD after taking up this post. Well, what about if that person might be an object of investigation? So now he has to report to the THB. Can you perhaps consider whether this arrangement would impact on our status of Hong Kong as an international aviation hub? Well, 2 years is the maximum time. As mentioned before, these posts will lapse as soon as the chief accident and safety investigator has been appointed. In any case, it's no later than 31st of March 2022. We have put down 2 year, the 2-year period, because it's based on our past experience. Last time we spent about 14 to 15 months to identify the right person. And it also depends on whether the person could report to duty, maybe from overseas, etc. So we have set in a margin. To answer your question about why we come here to apply for this post in such a rush manner, well, we actually set up this institution in 2018 September. So we need 14 to 15 months to in order to review the operation of the authority. And eventually, in January this year, we put it on the agenda item, but then for various reasons, the meeting could not be held. And that is why we have to come today to apply for this staffing establishment. I agree that this is not a satisfactory situation. But given all the constraints, we strive to find the best way forward. Well, otherwise, we would have to wait till Mr. Leung. We have to wait and ask Mr. Leung Manfat to continue taking up this position. Of course, we have no doubt about his ability and capability. However, Mr. Leung is at a non-directorate rank. If we ask him to take up that position for a relatively long time to head the AAIA, it is not the ideal or the most satisfactory situation or arrangement. Ms. Claudia Mo. Thank you, Chairman. This is a vacuum, and the vacuum could be as long as 2 years. And now you are seeking a person from the civil service to take up the post on a temporary basis, and you claim that this will be independent from the civil service. However, it is just like a Mickey Mouse profession. It's very unsatisfactory. It is fortunate that we have not had any major incidents during this vacuum period. Otherwise, we will be a laughing stock on the international arena. You have spent so long. Is it because your recruitment terms and conditions are not attractive enough that you could not find the right person to fill the post? I'd like to ask a question about the scope of the investigation of the AAIA. Is it only on the incidents occurring within Hong Kong, or anything that the control tower of our airport, the Hong Kong airport, or any incidents that is reported to, or the control tower. Well, if there is a candidate applying for the post, how are you going to sign a contract with this person? Perhaps the person might request to come to Hong Kong for 2 years and take a look first. How would you decide on the terms of the contract to be signed with this person? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Mo. ICAO has requirement about the impartiality of this authority. It's not independent from the government, but it should be independent from the aviation authority. In Hong Kong's case, that is the CAD. And from our past experience, we held a global recruitment. The response had been quite good, and most of the candidates were from overseas. Since this was a global recruitment exercise, there were 1 to 2 rounds of screening processes, and eventually, well, if after we have identified the right candidate, the person might need some time to make arrangements to leave his current post and then to come to Hong Kong. So at that time, altogether 14 to 15 months had been spent before the person could report to duty in Hong Kong. So this is a reasonable period. Well, we have to understand that it would not be as fast as recruiting someone from Hong Kong. I understand, Chairman, these are just the nitty-gritty. Could you just answer my question about the investigation scope first? You said that this should be independent from CAD. Would it cover everything within the flight information region? Well, the government departments are all interrelated. How do you explain its independence? Well, just now I talked about the independence requirement. Well, I was just repeating from the requirements of the ICAO. And this arrangement is in line with the international practice. As regards the investigation scope, I would just answer and then ask my colleagues to supplement. According to the regulations, any aviation accidents or serious incidents occurring in Hong Kong, within Hong Kong, or involving any aircrafts registered under Hong Kong would be within the scope of investigation. Well, what about something happened in Thailand? Would we have the right to investigate that incident? Yes, theoretically, if there was an accident occurring in Thailand, yes, Hong Kong, or if it involved a aircraft registered in Hong Kong or involves a lot of Hong Kong citizens, then yes, Hong Kong would have the right to investigate into that incident. On the other hand, if something occurred in Hong Kong and if it involved overseas aircraft or involving overseas citizens, then that overseas country would have the right to investigate into the incident as well. Mr. Low Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. Regarding the establishment of this independent investigation authority under the requirement of ICAO, I remember that this matter had been discussed about 3 years ago in this chamber, and at that time I also supported the proposal. Well, at that time I raised a point. I thought that this should be a long-term duty, so it should not be a temporary body. And now you ask for the establishment, and also the post, the appointment has lapsed right now, and now you are asking to make it a permanent post. I again strongly support to your proposal, and I think this is something that should be done. But I have a question. In the Finance Committee, we have approved the creation of a time-limited position, and that was approved in 2017. But the establishment of the AAIA, it was approved in September 2018, so about 9 months had passed before the establishment of the authority was approved. Well, I'd like to ask why we need to take about a year or so to obtain the approval and to establish this AAIA. Was it because it was difficult to find someone to fill the post to head the AAIA? And now this position, the appointment has lapsed in March, so we are now entering a vacuum period, and Mr. Leung Man-fat is now standing in to head the authority. Was Mr. Leung appointed during the 2018 recruitment exercise, or is it just a temporary arrangement? And also, if this proposal is approved, do you have the right person identified so the chief could be appointed as soon as approval is obtained? Do you have the right candidate in mind? Chairman, I'd like to answer the first question first, and then I'll defer to my colleagues for the other question. In 2017, we had to obtain the funding approval from the Legislative Council before we could start the global recruitment exercise. And since this is a directorate grade position, we have very high requirement about the person's expertise and professional background. So we conducted the recruitment exercise very carefully. The response had been very good indeed. But then we had to take some time to do the screening process. And after identifying the right candidate, we needed some time in order for that person to make his arrangements and leave his current appointment and make all the arrangements to come to Hong Kong. So altogether, we spent more than a year for that person to come to Hong Kong to report duty. For global recruitment exercise, we do need a longer time. After identifying the right person, there would be a few more months before the person could report to duty in Hong Kong.
Let's hear a brief reply from Mr. Leung. Mr. Lau. Well, the appointment of Mr. Leung is a transitional arrangement. I must emphasize that Mr. Leung has over 40 years of experience in the field, and he has participated in a number of investigations. So we have no doubt in relation to his capabilities. The member asks us about the right candidate we have in mind. As a chief investigator, that person has to have expertise, experience, and qualifications. So we have a very clear set of requirements in our mind for the CASI. And we, of course, will select the right candidate on the basis of objective and scientific criteria. But you started recruiting someone in September 2018. Who was it? It was a CASI that has left on the 31st of March this year. It's someone from outside Hong Kong, right? Mr. Ronick Chan, I support the government's proposal, but I have some questions. First, it says that they expect the workload of the AAIA will increase. That's why they propose to create a deputy to share the workload. How come that you would expect an increase in workload in air accident investigation? Well, with the pandemic, aviation traffic has been seriously affected. Would you need to reassess the time you need the deputy? In the document, it says that Well, it sets out the performance indicators since September 2018. There is only one published investigation result, and in relation to a number of accidents investigations that have been completed, 8 of them. So 1 published and 8 completed. When will they be published? Just now you said that there will be an expert panel set up. You have already recruited 4 of them. Will there be a proper structure of the expert panel? Of course, there won't be regular meetings. They will meet on a need basis. But will they work as an advisory body to vet the investigation report? Permanent Secretary, thank you. Regarding the last question, I will defer to Mr. Lau. I'll answer the other 2 questions. What we have in mind is that, well, at the time when this paper was compiled, we expected an increase in air traffic. And we assume that the number of accidents will increase. With the current pandemic, the aviation industry and the Hong Kong airport have ground to a halt. There will be a day when everything goes back to normal, then aviation traffic will continue to pick up. Yes, there may be a drop in air traffic volume, but that is only for the time being. Regarding investigation, you find the 8 cases in Annex 2. Well, basically, the authority has completed the investigations and has compiled a report. Well, as per Regulation 11 of Cap 448B in relation to Notice of Report and Representations stage, that means the report has been compiled and issued to relevant parties and individuals. Maybe the aircraft manufacturer or the airliner. We'll wait to see if they have any representations or comments to make. So it's passive for us. The authority would, after receiving these comments, if any, would consider whether there is a need to amend the report before they are published. Let's hear from Mr. Lau. The expert panel is set up under the objective that they will assist in accident investigation conducted by the authority. As the Permanent Secretary said, that the AAIA is independent from the CAD, so they will carry out the investigation independently. The expert panel will, in relation to certain questions or investigation, provide their advice. They will not participate in the investigation, nor will they vet the investigation report. Let me give you an example. There is Professor Man. You might have heard of him. He is a professor in aviation material. Well, if an investigation involves metal fatigue, Professor Man will provide advice and answer questions in relation to matters regarding metal fatigue. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, you've been saying that you want to that it is not easy to recruit a CASI. Well, for a position that is so difficult to fill, it seems that at the expiry of the contract, that person simply got up and leave, and the post is taken up by a civil servant. Why did you not ask that person to stay to ensure the impartiality will continue? There won't be any gap. Now you have made it very complicated. You say that the person who is going to fill the post will not revert to the CAD and will report to the THB. I want to ask a fundamental question. Since it is so difficult to recruit the right person, why did you just let that person go when, say, the clock strikes 12? Why did you not ask that person to stay to maintain continuity? Well, you will identify a suitable candidate to take up the time-limited post. That person will not revert to the CAD, but can that person apply to be a candidate in the recruitment exercise, or that person's only there as part of the transitional arrangement? That person cannot revert to the CAD and cannot apply for the vacancy. I also noticed that there is a large amount of investigators directly involved in investigation that come from the CAD. These investigators should be trained from the ground up by the AAIA in order to ensure a complete independency from the CAD. So from the perspective of avoiding conflict of interest, can you answer my 3 questions? Thank you for the questions. I'll first answer the last 2 questions. For the first one, I will defer to Mr. Lau. The independence and impartiality of the authority is something we value and attach a lot of importance to. However, reality is that majority of people with air accident investigation and training in Hong Kong come from the CAD. I believe that at the inception stage of similar air accident investigation authorities elsewhere, that was the experience. So we allow short-term secondment of investigators from CAD. The most important thing is that the head of the authority is independent. There are 3 non-civil servant posts. They are non-directorate grades. We have already given them the funding. We hope that the AAIA will recruit people who are interested and are of the right caliber. They may not have a background of civil aviation, but they will have a complementary role to play. If there is any air accident investigation, the CAD might be a party to the involved to the investigation. Non-civil service position holders will play their role. The transitional arrangement. The person seconded from the CAD will not be able to revert to the CAD, but the person may apply for the permanent post, but there won't be any special considerations or special treatment given to that person. They will be considered just like any other candidates. Please be brief. Well, it applies to the person who has left. Can you answer my first question as well, which is very important? Just give a quick answer. Why did you not ask that person to stay? Well, in 2017, when we asked for funding approval, the mandate was that on the 31st of March, the position and the funding will stop. But there are ways internally to deal with this. You can make special arrangements. Do you agree that is the right person to lead the authority? I'll draw a line. Let me draw a line here. Mr. Yu Siwing, in relation to the investigations, 8 of them have been completed, and there are 16 ongoing ones. You will rely on the person under the transitional arrangement to take up the job. It's not ideal. Well, what is the view of the CAD or the THB? Is there room for improvement? Can they expedite the investigation? So far, they have published 1 report. They have completed 8 investigations, but they are not published. Out of the 8, 3 are accidents and 5 are serious incidents. Can you maybe set out some basic requirements? Otherwise, the backlog will continue to grow. It may have an impact on the quality of investigation. As you know, that investigation reports may have a bearing on prevention of future accidents. In relation to accidents and serious incidents that take place overseas, have they encountered any difficulties to gain access to information, evidence, or physical access? Will overseas government try to hinder?
Hello.
Ms. Lau, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Yu's question. First, about investigation process or the time for investigation. As we understand, different accidents and serious incidents are very different in nature, some of which may involve fatality. When you look at Annex 2, the table shows the overall picture. We have completed 8 cases, in fact, and have reached the notice of report and representation stage as per Regulation 11 of Cap 448B. And we can see that we have actually enhanced the efficiency of the investigation process. And of course, there are room for improvement. We will continue to see if there are ways to improve our efficiency. Of course, we agree with Mr. Yu. That is, we do not hope to see the occurrence of accidents. And the most important thing is to have prevention. So we will step up with our in-depth investigation, and we will arrange workshops and also promotion activities in order to prevent accidents from occurring. The question about whether we encounter any difficulties when we conduct investigations involve overseas parties. Well, my answer is that no. Other countries and regions have been very cooperative. And our counterparts in these overseas countries and places have been very cooperative, and we have not encountered any major difficulties in carrying out our investigations. Well, Chairman, for serious incidents or accidents, I agree that it may take longer time to investigate. However, for general incidents, I think there might be some things that the airliners might have overlooked, and we could carry out investigations faster so that the airliners could be alerted more quickly. I agree. There are some incidents that are relatively simpler. Well, one of the incidents we took only about 10 months to complete the investigation. So it really depends on the nature of the incidents. Thank you. Mr. Tam, Jeremy Tam. Well, just now you mentioned that there was a memorandum of understanding that had been signed. Could you perhaps tell us more about this MOU, the contents of this MOU, and whether a copy of the MOU could be submitted to our panel for reference? And next, you talk about the four-person experts. Could you perhaps tell us who the four experts are? And next question is about the funding application. I wonder if the ICAO will downgrade Hong Kong, because now you are looking for someone from the CAD to take up a temporary post of Assistant Director General, to fill up the temporary post before the CASI could be appointed. But would this arrangement adversely impact on the status of Hong Kong as an international civil aviation hub? It may even affect the insurance premium. So this could be very serious. I'd like to know whether ICAO would downgrade the status of Hong Kong because of this arrangement. Last question. Well, this is a temporary post for 2 years, or it will be elapsed within 2 years if the candidate for CASC is appointed. But during the recruitment process, will this Assistant Director General of Civil Aviation be involved? Because there might be conflict of interest. The later the person could be appointed, the longer this Assistant Director General could stay in the post. I don't know, perhaps because of the economic situation now, it might be faster or quicker for you to identify the right person to take up the post of CASC. So if this Assistant Director General is involved in the recruitment exercise, would there be a conflict of interest? Okay, my direct answer is no, because the government is very conscious of this, because if there may be conflict of interest, the person could not be involved in the recruitment exercise. Well, I can tell you that this recruitment exercise will be headed by myself. Well, Chairman, about the MOU, yes, we have signed the MOU. Well, basically, it sets out the role played by the AAIA and the CAD in investigation of accidents and serious incidents. It also set out a systematic channel for exchange of information and also access to accident sites, etc. So it sets out the roles played by the different parties. I'm sorry, could you perhaps provide a copy of this MOU to our committee? I'll go back and go through the contents, and then I'll answer you after the meeting. About the experts, yes, we have 4 experts invited. First is Mr. Jim Wing Nin, engineer. He is the Honorary Secretary of the Aviation Division of HKIE. Second is Professor Man, Professor of the Hong Kong Poly University. Third, Head and Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering from the HKUST, a professor. And the fourth expert is a former Deputy Aviation Deputy Director General of CAD, Mr. Man Liu Sum. Yes, the possibility of ICAO downgrading Hong Kong status is very slim. In fact, I myself have written to the Secretary General of ICAO and explained to him the entire situation and our arrangement. ICAO has verbally replied us and telling us that they have taken note of this change and they has not raised any concern or questions. So Mr. Tam can rest assured that this proposed arrangement will not result in the downward grading of ICAO of Hong Kong's status. Mr. Holden Chow, please. Under the Chief Accident and Safety Investigator, there will be a deputy. On para 12 and 13, it mentioned about the arrangement of this Deputy Chief Accident and Safety Investigator. Well, this deputy has to share the duties and tasks of the CASI and perhaps attend an international conference on his behalf. For investigation, I believe that it would take a long time. And there are a lot of liaison work for this deputy. So my question is that would one deputy be enough to help out the heavy workload of the CASI? Could you tell us who else would be below the CASI? Would there be any other staff to help him out? Because I'm a bit worried that according to para 12 and 13, the workload is pretty heavy. And I think one deputy might not be enough. If you do not have enough manpower provision, the investigation quality and standards will be adversely affected. So I think we have to pay attention to this. Could you perhaps explain how you evaluate the sufficiency of manpower provision? Thank you, Mr. Chow, for your question. For Air Accident Investigation Authority, the most important task is to investigate into air accident and serious incidents. When this authority was first incepted, we mentioned already that there are other tasks that will be taken up by the AAIA in addition to investigation of accidents. And that is the reason why we propose to create another role, another position, the position of a deputy chief investigator, so that the person could share the workload and the burden of the CASI. Mr. Lam? Yes, I'd like to supplement. For the deputy investigator, yes, of course, he will also shoulder pretty heavy workload. But for the entire AAIA, there will be a chief investigator, a deputy investigator, and also 5 senior operation officers. So together, they will work as a team to carry out investigations. If there are overseas activities, for instance, conferences that they have to attend, if the chief and the deputy chief could not attend, then we would ask one of the senior operation officers to attend on their behalf. We will identify the most suitable person to attend these activities on their behalf. Any other questions? No. All right. For the permanent setup and staffing proposals of AAIA, do you have any other questions? If not, we will submit it to the ESC and also the Finance Committee for approval. I have a follow-up question. Well, of course, I agree to your proposed structure and establishment. Perhaps you could raise that question in the ESC. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. We will now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is report on the work of the Competition Commission. If you have a question, please press the required to speak button. We now would like to invite the administration and representative from the Competition Commission to enter the meeting room. We have Chairperson of the Competition Commission, Ms. Anna Hu, Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Brent Sidner, Senior Executive Director, Mr. Russell Butt, and we'll also have representative from the Commerce and Economic Development panel. We have Ms. Vivian Sam and Ms. Liana Law. We also have Ms. Esther Wang, Principal Assistant Secretary for the Environment. And we also have Secretary Mr. Wang Kam Singh, Secretary for Environment, and also Deputy Secretary Ms. Irene Young, and also Undersecretary Mr. Zhe Jin Wan. Please press the button if you wish to speak. 4 minutes each, please. Shall we now invite Ms. Anna Hu to walk us through the paper and the report? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Chairman, Deputy Chairman, members, good morning. Today we also have Mr. Brent Schneider and Mr. Rachel Butt with me here. We will together try to answer questions from members. We also have representative from the. We also have Secretary for Environment, and also from the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau. For the Competition Commission, last year we had conducted some work on litigation and also on enforcement. We have 2 cases that we have won, and later on we will go into further details about our enforcement situation. We also have come up with some suggestions to the government, some advice to the government, and also receive some applications and requests from different industries. Later on, Mr. Butt will explain in further details. The Competition Commission is a relatively young body, and we have started only for a short period of time. The most important thing for us is to set up our efficiency, work efficiency, also change the culture in society and gain confidence from society. We need to have strategies in order to achieve these goals. There are 3 very important points that we have to bear in mind. First, we must protect the public interest. Second, we must set a legal precedent. There are some rules and regulations that have not legal precedent. So this is also very important. And third is to fight against a contravention against a competition. We have to prevent the occurrence of these.
We have already enhanced our deterrence effect. Say, for example, we have started enforcing personal liability. We have also clarified the standards of compensation or damages, as well as fines and the circumstances under which we can enhance that. We will, in the future, develop more tools to address different issues. We hope that there will be new development in other areas. Say, for example, the second conduct rule. I'd like to mention something here. I have shortened my presentation because I asked the chairperson to give me time to reply when we talk about oil prices. There is a letter from Mr. Wong, the secretary, and I'd like to give you some background information. This will be my last attendance as the chairperson of the Competition Commission. I thank you all because, well, my term will expire at the end of the month. I thank you all for your support. I hope that members will continue to support the work of the Commission. I'd also like to thank the CEDB and their colleagues. They have given us tremendous support. They have given us an unprecedented amount of funding for litigation. I thank them all. Thank you. Now we open the floor for members to ask questions. First, Mr. Michael Look, to be followed by Mr. Andrew Wen. Well, for forward oil prices, it has dropped to minus. We understand that, well, that doesn't mean that crude oil or refined oil have the same price level. But over the years, we have seen the phenomenon where oil prices increases. For gas stations, people have to pay more, whereas when the prices drop, it will take a very long time for that to drop. I remember a remark was said in relation to oil prices. Oil prices have made you very angry. Oil companies have not adopted the suggestion by the chairperson and the LegCo. I see that the retail price of oil is about $10. So the government charges about $6.06 as their duty. That means that there is about $4 or so that is left. So out of that amount, how much of it is necessary expenditure, including, say, rent, labor, overhead? Is there any room for further compression of the prices? I hear that per liter, oil companies make a profit of about $1 or so. So I think it's a profit of about 10%. I would like to ask the Deputy Secretary if there is anything they can do. In relation to evidence collection, it seems that the Competition Commission is a toothless tiger. So I'd like to ask, will the government give them more investigatory power to fight against cartel? I thank the question. Well, I was going to ask my colleague to present their work first, but it doesn't matter. They can do that later. In relation to oil prices and the industry, I know that this has been around for a very long time. As to whether we need more power to collect information, to request information, of course the answer is yes. It's only a matter of how. Well, currently, as you can see from our past report, if we fail to get evidence or sufficient information to conduct analysis, it would affect our work and our ability to reach a conclusion. About oil prices, well, for cartel cases and oil prices, they are completely different things. If there is evidence to show that there is a cartel, of course we will not hesitate to take parties to the court. We have relaxed our leniency program. If there is insider information, we welcome. If the government has or anyone has any information for us, we welcome it all. I think members would ask you questions along that line. So can the government answer us whether there is any room to drive oil prices down? I thank Ms. Wu and the Competition Commission for their hard work. They have done a lot of work, say for example, their effort to fight against bid rigging and cartel. Well, there are a number of recommendations in the 2017 report. So far, we have not seen any reply from the government, say, for example, in relation to oil prices, to review the tender exercise system, location of gas stations, and the power and their statutory power to collect information. Of course, if they're caught in the act, that's different. But now they can't even reach that threshold. Well, you mentioned about the drop in oil prices. Of course, we understand that there is a discrepancy. Just now, a member asked about it. We all notice the phenomenon, and it is not reasonable. Well, there was a drop of from $18 to $9.10. But information from the Census and Statistics Department show that the extent of drop actually is way above 9.1. Of course, oil companies would say that we have already procured the oil a long time ago. How come when oil prices increase, they quickly put the price up? Well, you have spent a lot of time to conduct a study in oil prices, but these recommendations are not taken up. Are you disappointed? I do think that the government will have to give more power for the Competition Commission to collect information and evidence. Otherwise, it will be a toothless tiger, and they will not be able to actually do their work. Let's hear from Ms. Wu and then from Mr. Wang, the Secretary. Thank you. Well, thank you for giving me the chance to explain about the high oil prices. Oil companies have been saying that because of high rental, high labor cost, overhead. Previously, they said high oil prices as well. Well, the government themselves even said that for selling 95 RON and compared to 98 RON is actually more or less the same. It doesn't make much of a difference in relation to oil prices. We sell 98 RON and 98 plus. Basically, they are of the same level. For consumers, that is not really a choice, because is expensive oil or more expensive oil. Well, for the use of a 95 RON, it will meet the needs of most fleet. We are aware that previously there was the sale of 95 RON, but it stopped. For the environment, they try to limit the amount of vehicles. That also is a factor for high oil prices, and also the phenomenon you find here. So is it really the phenomenon that they will put up the price very quickly when there is a increase, and slow down when prices drop? Well, we do need to give the Environment Bureau a chance to reply. in relation to oil prices, whether oil companies increase the price more quickly than lowering them. Since January, there has been 11 times when oil prices have been adjusted downwards, 8 times in March alone. So you can see that they have reduced the prices rather quickly as well. Is it comparable to the extent of reduction in the market? Well, for refined oil and crude oil, they are different. There is a time lag. For the production of refined oil to transportation to Hong Kong, there is also another time lag. Well, let me give you an example of Singapore. Well, it takes time to transport the oil, but it's close to the situation in Hong Kong. Since January, for Singapore, for diesel and the other type, like fossil fuel, it's about $7 or so. For Hong Kong, it's about $1.50. So you see that if you take transportation away from the equation, there is a little difference. For diesel in Singapore is $1.35. For Hong Kong is about $1.50. So if you look at the figures, you can see that the downward adjustment is also quite frequent and fast. It's just that from crude oil to refined oil to transportation, there is a time lag. Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Ms. Anna Wu for her contribution to the Competition Commission. The Commission said that there are 35 public policy areas that they would give recommendations on. Does it include what we're going to discuss here? A number of members have talked about increasing prices more quickly than lowering them. Well, we often talk about when it comes to the duty, the $6.06, rental, overhead, all the fixed costs. Can the government do something by asking oil companies to announce the percentage of fixed costs? The only variable is the price of oil. Then we will be able to tell whether they lower the price following the trend of price difference in import of oil. And you have given us a reply, Mr. Wong. You said that oil companies offer different discounts and concessions, so the actual price is lower. For these discount cards, it's controlled by oil companies. Well, there is a telephone number on the card. You won't be able to call anyone. No one will pick up the phone. So not everyone can enjoy this discount offered by these discount cards. But it is an important factor because it obscures transparency. Can you exclude the offering of discount card in the calculation of oil prices?
Ms. Hu, Chairman. Part of the question is about whether we have data. We're talking about oil discounts. From 2015, well, before 2015, we were not able to obtain data. But after that, well, basically, it's because we could not have access to the data before 2015. And second, the fixing of the oil price is done by the Environment Bureau. So I hope that from the policies level and also from the data level, the Bureau will be able to be more open so as to share these data and information with the public. Only after that could we be more focused in investigating into the issue. Second point. As mentioned in Mr. Wong's letter, there has never been a free market, a free oil market. there's only a market failure. When it happens, then the government usually will regulate it or interfere with it with policies. Well, this started as early as the 70s. So since if the government accepts the fact that the oil prices is high, and also because of a limitation of the number of vehicles and also gas stations, then I think the government should really come up with some measures and policies in order for the consumers to enjoy a lower price oil or lower cost in auto fuel. Well, why does the government have this kind of mentality? Secretary, I'll give you more time to answer that question. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to say a few points. First, about 95 RON. Well, government has studied very carefully about the use of 95 RON auto fuel. Well, the analysis is pretty complex. I would perhaps highlight a few points only. If we look at the price of refined oil, 95 RON and 98 RON are more or less the same. The difference is only about 10 to 20 cents. So if we want to use 95 RON in order to lower the auto fuel price, the effect would be very limited. And second, Hong Kong is a very small and crowded city, so the number of gas station is very limited. If we want to introduce the use of 95 RON, we will need to find more places in order to set up a new gas stations. And also the oil tank, we need to build new oil tank in order to keep these 95 RON of oil. So if the price difference is only so slight, and it would involve costs if we introduce the use of 95 RON, so the conclusion is that it is not worth doing it. And two other questions. First, I think because of a limitation of time, perhaps you could answer those two questions later on. Mr. Holden Zhao, please. Thank you, Chairman. Well, oil prices is plummeting worldwide, but then we find that in Hong Kong the oil prices it's not affected at all. So it is still, there are more going up and less coming down, and this is not the situation for one day or two. This has all along been the situation in Hong Kong. Well, there is no file could be opened to investigate into this issue about the fixing of price of the oil companies. The reason is because the oil companies refused to provide important information to the investigation body. My question is, since we have a representative from the Environment Bureau, I'd like to ask whether you would release relevant information about the oil companies, about how they fix prices, to the Competition Commission, so that the Commission could start investigation and study, looking into the problem, so that a file could be opened, so that the Competition Commission could open the file to look into the matter. Second point, the citizens are actually asking the government to interfere in order to regulate the auto fuel prices. But as of today, I still don't see this happening. I find that the government is still not interfering and just coming up with explanations and sort of excuses to tell us why this is the case. And the third point is that, well, for Competition Commission, Ms. Wu already mentioned that we could have used 95 RON instead of the more expensive 98 RON. But then the Environment Bureau answer is that the price difference between the two is only very small. Well, this is not acceptable. This is really incredible. Are you actually involving in this price fixing matter? Why don't you try to look for cheaper oil in order for our citizens to enjoy less expensive auto fuel? So I'd like the Environment Bureau to answer these questions of mine. Yes. My impression is that the government seems to be speaking for the oil companies, whereas the Competition Commission is speaking for the people. But this is really unacceptable and really very strange. How come the government is not speaking for the people of Hong Kong? Well, Chairman, as I mentioned, if we look at the oil prices in other places and countries, well, I cite an example of Singapore. We are very clear that, and we have also analyzed their data objectively. In Singapore, during the same period of time as in Hong Kong, their reduction of the diesel it's about $1.70. In Hong Kong, it's $1.50 reduction. So that means there is still some room for downward adjustment of oil prices in Hong Kong. We agree to this. This is an objective fact. We have already conveyed this message to the oil companies and asked them to regulate their oil prices accordingly. Well, in Hong Kong, we use refined oil, and we need some time for this oil to be imported into Hong Kong. There is some time lag. So, of course, we have to address the needs of Hong Kong's consumers. But then we are actually on the side of Hong Kong people. We also hope that we could use less expensive oil. But then if we compare the situation in Hong Kong with that of Singapore, we know that we are relatively or more or less the same. Only very slight room for downward adjustment. Mr. Jeremy Tam, could the officials perhaps turn on the webcam, because I have some chart to show you later on. I'd like to thank Ms. Wu for her great work in the Competition Commission. Of course, I hope that you will stay, but if not, I hope that we will have also a suitable and also capable chairperson to head the commission. Well, there is a chart here. The yellow line shows the oil prices, the fluctuation of the oil prices in the past 4 to 5 years. In about 2016, January, it was about $27. But then to now, it's even lower than that. It's record low. But then if we compare with the pre-tax oil prices, it is still $2 more expensive than the lowest point in 2015. If we look at the Singapore situation, this is from the Environment Bureau. In 2016, around 2016, it's the lowest point. It hits the lowest. It's the imported oil in Singapore. But for now, the imported oil, it's also hitting record low. But then during the same period of time, the oil price before tax was less than $8, and now it's about $10, and the difference is about $2.50. So it means the imported fuel price is lower than the record low at that time. But then the oil price that we're selling now, it's about $2 more expensive than the lowest point. So it's not just about more going up and less coming down. It's about more in increment but less in the downward adjustment. So we also mentioned the difference between Hong Kong and Singapore, but if we look at it from a cumulative point of view, we know that we are actually very far behind Singapore. And another chart here. In the past 14 days, there are two companies here, oil company A and B, both companies selling oil at the same price, 17.4, and then within 14 days, nine of which the oil prices of these two companies were identical. It's as close as down to the cent. And the other two oil companies C and D, within the 14 days, one company is selling $15.4, another $15.2, one $15.04, and the other, the difference is only 10 cents. Only 10 cents difference between the two companies. Within this 14 days period, 10 out of 14 days had this situation, that is the difference of only 10 cents between the two companies. And for the other 4 days, there is also a pattern. The difference is $1. The difference of $1 between these two companies for the 4 days. So perhaps for a company, they have a discount on a certain day in a week. There is a dollar discount. Well, I have highlighted the situation here. It's very clear. The pattern is very clear. Well, there is a case of suspected price fixing, isn't it? Secretary, thank you very much, Mr. Tam, for your data. Chairman, let me answer the question about our comparison with Singapore. We're talking about two things here. Mr. Tam, the chart that he's shown is about the difference, the price difference between refined oil and the oil on sale. It's MOPS. In Singapore, the retail price in the gas stations, well, that was what I was talking about. So it's two different sets of data in Hong Kong and also in Singapore, because there is a fluctuation of oil prices worldwide. So in both places, we could see a adjustment of oil prices in both Hong Kong and Singapore. Well, in Singapore, the average, they have reduced $1.70. In Hong Kong, $1.50 reduction. And for diesel, well, Secretary, you've already mentioned about it. I'm not talking about these 2 days, Secretary. Yes, he has shown us the situation for a period of time. We're not talking about only these few days. Mr. Ho Kai Ming. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Wu. Well, I think you have really spoken very frankly. High auto fuel prices are really caused by the government. Just now you mentioned about data, the oil prices comparison between Hong Kong and Singapore. Well, I'd like to ask the Secretary, in Singapore per liter, how much is it per liter of oil in Singapore? Do you know? Well, what's the point of just telling us these figures if you don't even know how much per liter? Do you know that it's already about $4 less than that in Hong Kong? Well, in Hong Kong, we're selling $15 to $16 per liter. Well, the reduction percentage, there's a great difference. Why don't you talk about the reduction percentage? And you only mentioned about the actual figures. Is it because you just try to evade the problem? Well, actually, Hong Kong, we have to pay more. Or because in Hong Kong, within $15 to $16, there are $5 to $6 that the government will have taken.
Let me ask Mr. Wong, the Secretary. Well, under the anti-epidemic fund, will you give the money back to Hong Kong people from the money you've collected? Because, well, it is stated very clearly on the receipt how much duty you have charged. Will you refund them back to the people in order to alleviate their burden? There are two different interpretations. There is diesel. Is duty-free. The $6 is petrol. So if you're talking about commercial vehicles and private cars, you will have to separate them because there is no duty imposed on diesel. That's our understanding. So under the anti-epidemic fund, through relevant bureaus, targeted support measures are launched for respective sectors. So in relation to commercial vehicles, we have measures to help them. If you're talking about in general, affordability, traffic congestion, environmental issues, that's a complicated matter. Members, as I heard, ask about what can be done for this period of time? In the first round of the anti-epidemic fund, there are relief measures available for relevant sectors. Then will you help members of the public by reducing your duty so that the cost for filling up your vehicle will be reduced? Well, there is a huge difference. A 40% difference in crude oil prices. Well, I don't know whether it's because they have procured oil from the UK or from the US because it's very low. Well, perhaps it's an issue that the Competition Commission is to deal with. Are there any ways that the government can do to help people during the pandemic? Well, in a certain place for crude oil futures, the price is negative. And there are also at the same time when barrels of oil can sell for about $20. You have to first understand the relationship of the different things. Singapore is an appropriate comparison because the situation is quite close to that in Hong Kong. Well, in past a few months, there has been dozens of drops. It's the extent of the reduction is close to that in Singapore. For commercial vehicles, we have support measures for them. For private cars, well, we have considerations in terms of environmental protection, traffic, as well as economic ones. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, just now, Ms. Anna Wu, the chairperson, makes a very good point. Do we see the oil market as a free market? Will there be any market failure? If there won't be any, then the government will not intervene. I'd like to ask, in relation to auto fuel market, there are only a handful of companies in Hong Kong. This is a typical oligopoly. Will the government see this as a market failure? If you do, then I have other questions to ask. First, does the administration agree that the oligopoly is a market failure requiring intervention from the government, yes or no? Do you agree, Secretary? Through different measures, please answer this basic question first. Do you agree that for auto fuel market in Hong Kong, there is oligopoly? Therefore, there is market failure requiring intervention from the government. We do intervene. We have a tender system to increase number of suppliers. There are 6 of them. No, you don't have to answer me this way. Just go out, go and visit the different gas stations. You will find that the prices are more or less the same. And then you say that there will be discounts. But what we can see on the face of it is that the measures you have fail to address the market failure brought by the oligopoly. In that case, will the government admit that they need to further intervene into the auto fuel market because there is no free market competition? There are different angles and perspectives. Well, that means you don't agree. Well, for different discount cards, there are different prices, and they can make choices. So, oil companies can use hidden information to withhold information from consumers in order to maximize their profit, and you're not going to do anything about it. Well, as I said, that in the morning, consumers can make use of a computer system to look at the different oil prices. So you accept that this amounts to a free flow of information. I hear that it's difficult to get the information to begin with. If it is so difficult to get the information, how can you efficiently help consumer to find the best option? Secondly, well, the government, when compiling the information, they have information about the different cost structures of different oil companies. If that is the case, why can't you give the information to the Competition Commission for them to look at the difference in cost structure? And this is a tool to maximize their profit. Should I answer? Be brief, please. I thank the member for the series of questions. In short, it's difficult for us to find and get the information. We have asked the government, we have asked oil companies. The reply from oil companies is that it's sensitive information, we can't give it to you. So obviously we have encountered difficulties. I don't know whether the government encountered the same difficulty. My impression that the government gets more information than we do. If they are happy to give us the information for our consideration, we'll be more than happy to receive it. Let me also add that when we compile the report, some oil companies sent us a legal letter asking us to give them our report to vet before we publish it, and at the same time they refuse to give us information. Well, of course, it is not a level playing field. They will not send a letter to the government asking them to show them the draft policy before launching them. I'm talking about market failure. The only way to address market failure is government intervention. Of course, if you give us more power, we will be happy to take up the challenge, and if we have the information, we will be more than happy to start litigation. Mr. Tommy Zhou. It seems that oil has become an item under your portfolio. It is not the case that we ask you to manage market failure. There is already an oligopoly formed. The government has to make adjustments to deal with a monopoly or an oligopoly to stop them from milking the public dry. I know what you will say in your answer. It won't be pleasant. You keep saying that whether it is water charges, waste charges. Of course, what you'd like is to charge $1,000 per gallon. Then no one will be able to afford to pay, and they won't generate any waste or use anything. I'm afraid that I can't agree with your approach of a huge stick to try to get people to do certain things. I have asked many times. You talk about high rental prices, labor cost, transportation cost. I think if you have the guts, you can tell them that you are going to do something. They may stop supplying oil to Hong Kong. We can see that for crude oil futures for June is minus. It means that it will be very cheap to buy oil in June. Are you just going to turn a blind eye to it? You don't even want them to reduce the price. You hope that they will increase oil prices so people will use less. Don't talk to me about Singapore. I can use the US as an example. Well, back in the days when I drove, it's just about 10 cents per gallon. You can't compare apples with oranges. Don't just use prices as the yardstick. Don't allow oil companies to fleece Hong Kong. And there are places in Hong Kong that can only use LPG, so they have to pay high prices for LPG because they can't use town gas. Well, there is a basket of considerations regarding energy, affordability, the impact on the environment, and others. I need to clarify something. We don't use crude oil in Hong Kong, we use refined oil in Hong Kong. So when you look at prices, you have to look at prices of refined oil and its impact on Hong Kong when they're imported. I'll draw a line here. And I have to extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Next, Mr. Frankie Yick. Thank you. I don't know if I have enough time to say what I want to say in 4 minutes. Starting from 2014, I have started to talk about this issue. I've asked questions here and the Consumer Council. If the government doesn't change the rules of the games, the situation will never change. At one point, I suggested that there should be a formula used to set prices in order to introduce genuine competition in the market. For the LPG market, that is the same. When we buy fuel ourselves, we do that as well. You do need to give a serious consideration. When it comes to petrol retail prices, you will see that if you conduct analysis, that a part of it comes from the land price of the gas station. Since they have already levied a $6 duty, why do they have to charge a land premium? Of course, there is a price of land, but there must be different prices. Say, in Shantin is this amount per square foot and something else for a different place. They will add the operation cost, they will add all the overhead and then the land premium, and then they can work out the cost. I have a paper with me. It's December 2019. Well, there are 5 gas stations. We're talking about $2.8 billion for the 5 gas stations. They have all been renewed, the lease. So every day, let's assume that everything is constant and the same. So it's about $76,000 per day in land price. Let's assume that they sell about 30,000 liters per day. That means for every liter you fill, you will have to pay another $2 in land price. So you can work everything out with all the different costs. You give the bid to the lowest retail price. It's just like LPG. Well, you work out the mean and the average and use it as a price for the next month. That is what the approach for overseas countries. When Mr. Wu Chiwai says that, the prices are more or less the same, maybe a difference of just 10 cents. That is just a smoke screen. If to use a different discount programs for diesel import price is cheaper and is duty free. How come they are sold at such high prices? Representatives from the trade said in a radio program that you pay about $5, $6 at a wholesale level, but if you try to fill at the retail level, it's $10. It seems that they have charged duty on behalf of the government. I don't understand.
Well, you just mentioned that Hong Kong has reduced more than that of Singapore, but Hong Kong is duty free. What about Singapore? How can we compare the two? Secretary? Well, yes, talking about land premium of the gas station. This is a very complex issue. It involves different government departments and there are different considerations. We have to take care of the importance to maintain a reasonable oil prices. This is a very complex issue. We have heard your views. Well, this is during a pandemic period. We believe that society will resume after that. We will keep an open mind and see how we could tackle this problem afterwards. Well, Chairman, can I just one word to supplement? Just now, the concept that I have raised is to reduce or to change the rules of the game. Mr. Butt is very clear about this. I hope that you have the opportunity to explain to the Secretary about this thought of ours. Mr. Shiu Cafe. Thank you, Chair. Last week, Mr. Chung Kok-pan mentioned about this issue on oil prices. Well, we know that we have this meeting today, and the reason why we've invited the Secretary here, it's very important. We are really very unhappy about your performance. We have to invite and re-invite you to come to attend this meeting. Well, my friends keep asking me about how we could tackle this problem. This issue has been dragging on for years. This is the oil prices is very transparent. We all know about the fluctuation of the oil price. Of course, you mentioned about the difference between a refined oil and crude oil, etc. But I think the general picture is the same, and we affect one another. The Competition Commission has come up with a comparison between Singapore and Hong Kong, and well, a lot of Hong Kong citizens actually see it all. We all understand what's happening. Hong Kong is suffering from a high auto fuel cost. We have a very limited space, and we don't need a long haul to transport the oil. Hong Kong is just a small city. Well, the most important cause is, as we all know, land price. You have to be answerable to Hong Kong citizens. We all Hong Kong people have a lot of grudges because we see the oil prices coming down. However, we still have to pay very high price for auto fuel. So Hong Kong citizens would feel that they're being robbed off. So the Competition Commission was set up several years ago. We were all very happy about it. And at that time, we really had high hopes and hoped that this commission would tackle this problem, the problem of price fixing among the oil companies in Hong Kong. However, a number of years have passed and the problem still exists. The government perhaps should come up with a solution. Well, Hong Kong people are feeling very unhappy about it. I'll leave some time for the Secretary to answer my question. Secretary? Well, actually, the question is more or less the same as the previous ones. Well, Hong Kong has a very unique situation. We have to pay attention to the ability of the oil companies in facing the price pressure. We also have to consider environment issues and also the space constraints in Hong Kong. And there are different government departments involved in coming up with the solutions to tackle this problem. And also, in addition to that, we are now facing the pandemic, and we hope that after this, we will be able to resume our work back to normal, and we will keep an open mind to see how we could continue to tackle this problem. We have to solve the problem And there should be a kind of interdepartmental solution or strategies to this. This is my answer. Secretary? Well, when the oil prices was as high as $100 per barrel, but then we have been paying the same price as what we are paying now. Whereas now the oil prices has dropped so drastically. How could you convince Hong Kong people about the rationale behind this? When the futures has dropped to the negative point, we are still paying about $26. So there is no direct relations. Well, Chairman, the oil price has reached as high as $140, and then we're still paying about $10 odd. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Anna Wu, and also the good work of the Competition Commission, which has been working very hard for the people of Hong Kong. Well, of course, some people may have some misunderstanding about the work of the Commission, thinking that the Commission did not want to fight the problem of price fixing among the oil companies in Hong Kong. I think this is a misunderstanding. I know that the Commission has been working very hard. It's just that there are a lot of constraints, that a lot of things you could not do because of these constraints. Well, about the autofill prices, it seems that the Environment Bureau is bearing the brunt. Well, in fact, you do not need to give explanations, reasons for the fixing of oil prices in Hong Kong. You do not need to speak for them. Well, we are business people, and it is very easy for us to calculate the numbers. Well, there are two problems here. First, it's about the speed and also the magnitude of price adjustment, oil price adjustment. Crude oil and refined oil, the adjustment of refined oil prices is lagging behind that of crude oil. Well, of course, we need time for crude oil to be refined and delivered to the final destination. There is a time lag, I agree. However, the problem is that for addition or raising of prices, it becomes faster than the reduction of oil prices, and that's the problem. Second, about the magnitude of price adjustment. The cost is fixed. For instance, land price, labor costs, etc. All these are fixed. For the variables, it's the fuel prices. If we look at the fluctuation in the price of the crude oil, and if we find that it is completely out of bounds and it's completely different from the price adjustment of refined oil, of course people will complain and people will find that it is problematic. Of course, there's nothing you can do if it is a completely open market. However, for the sale of oil, of autofill, the government has very strict control. Under this kind of strict control, that is why we cannot accept this current situation of the oil prices going up so quickly and coming down so slowly. I think the government really have to change its mentality. I think the government should stand on the side of the people of Hong Kong. You should stand with the people of Hong Kong and fight against the oil companies who are like the tigers, oppressing the people of Hong Kong. Yes, we do have the impression today that the government is standing on the side of the oil companies instead of standing by the people of Hong Kong. Well, Secretary, I don't agree with you, Chairman. First, we have already urged the oil companies to adjust their oil prices according to the situation, and they have already reduced more than 10 times in the past months. And we have provided with the public with the data so that people can make a very objective judgment. Chairman, I think we have missed out one very important point, and I need the Secretary to answer this question. It's about the government policy on fuel prices. Well, this is under your ambit. Is it because it affects the environment? We want people to use private vehicles less? Or is it a policy of the government to keep the oil prices at a high level? Just say so. It doesn't matter. For example, in Europe, the oil prices is much higher than the US and also is Japan. If this is the government policy, just say so. Just tell us. Well, we have to consider about the environment, protection of environment. If the oil prices is higher, then people would use less cars and use public transport more. And the second, whether we want to help the consumers and the industries. Tell us clearly your government policy. Just let us know. Chair, thank you for the question. This is a very good question. We have to look at this problem in an all-rounded point of view. Well, today, perhaps members are just looking at the oil prices from a single perspective, just about the price. Of course, it involves different aspects. First, we need to have a safe and reliable supply of fuel. This is important to society. And second, we have to consider the protection of environment, and also there should be a balance. We should strike a balance between protecting the environment and also stimulating and protecting our industry and commercial activities. Well, there are two elements. First, about crude oil, about diesel, that is for supporting the industry, and then for refined oil, it's for the private cars. First, it's duty-free diesel. We have to support the operation of the industry. For LPG and also refined oil, there is a duty. Tax is imposed. So we have to strike a balance. Land is also a very important element. We have very limited supply of land. And so we really have to think very carefully of how we could utilize the land in. So these are all the different factors that we have to consider in. When we compare the number of gas stations with the number of vehicles in Hong Kong, the ratio is not low at all when we compare that with other countries in the world. For instance, Tokyo, Seoul, etc. The number of gas stations in Hong Kong is actually higher than that in other Southeast Asian countries. So we are actually making good use of our limited land. So simply put, we have to maintain a safe and stable supply of fuel in Hong Kong. And second, we have to strike a balance between protecting the environment and also encouraging the industry and supporting the business. We have to support the trucks and also the vehicles used by the industry. But on the other hand, we have to keep the number of private vehicles so as to protect the environment. Well, this is how we consider the issue from an all-rounded point of view.
I think the Secretary, the Environment Bureau will have to give us a detailed information paper explaining their stance on what areas they consider they use tax. Say, for example, first registration tax, that is higher and higher because you don't want us to buy expensive cars. You have to strike a balance. And if, in order to do that, what adjustments can the government make on their policies? Mr. Lo Wai Kwok, I have driven and filled the vehicle up at different places, US, Canada, Europe, mainland, Hong Kong. Similar to a lot of people, we all find that it is most expensive to fill your car up in Hong Kong for whatever reasons. For drivers, it's a heavy burden. Even if you are not a driver, you have to take transport. So you are indirectly affected by expensive oil prices. That is another problem heavily criticized. For some unknown reason, oil prices offered by different oil companies are strangely similar. And there is also this rockets and feathers, that is, prices increasing faster than when they are lowered. From my observation, it's about, the range of fluctuation is about $50 to $150 for crude oil prices. It's a very rare occurrence when prices have dropped to below zero. Well, it may be the oil prices in Hong Kong may have something to do with the difference in crude oil and refined oil, but that should not be that much. And it's said that, well, the fuel in Hong Kong is stock. But I don't know when that new price will affect us. I agree with some other members that it is not just for the Environment Bureau to supervise and control this area. But the Environment Bureau is responsible for the environment, so they should have a clear set of analytic tools to, say, find out the relationship between crude oil prices and retail prices in Hong Kong, the time lag, and how. You need this tool in order to effectively monitor the market. You can't just say something that is judicial notice. I do believe that there are experts in the Bureau capable of taking up the work. Given the fluctuations and the changes of crude oil prices, when will we feel that change in Hong Kong? Let's hear from Ms. Yang, the Deputy Secretary. Thank you. Members observed that oil prices in Hong Kong are higher than other places. There are some inherent unfavorable factors in Hong Kong. We have a small oil market. We have no oil refinery, so we rely solely on imports. These are the unfavorable conditions affecting Hong Kong's oil prices. Our approach is that for auto fuel, it operates in a free market based on commercial principles. The government's work falls on 3 areas. First, to ensure there is sufficient supply. 2, to enhance transparency of prices as far as possible. And 3, to remove entry barrier in order to foster competition. Sorry, you haven't answered my question. Do you have an analytic tool? Perhaps you can ask the question afterwards. Mr. Yu Si Wing. I'd like to ask the Competition Commission. There are 3 online travel agencies. They have assigned some agreements with accommodation providers. They have failed to meet certain competition requirements, and you ask them to make further representation. If the Commission doesn't accept their representations, and if you think that their commitments are problematic, what will be your next step? And if it involves overseas hotels, that means they have signed similar agreements with overseas hotels, but they publicize the information in Hong Kong saying that they offer the lowest price for overseas hotels. Will the Commission get involved, or is it the case that they will not get involved because these are agreements involving overseas hotels? Thank you for the question. we're here to give you a report, but we have spent a lot of time on oil. Maybe I'll ask Brent or Russell to answer the question.
Thank you very much for that question. We have had commitments proposed to us by the 3 major online travel agents to address concerns that we have about what are known as parity provisions, which require a hotel to offer essentially the same rates to all of the different online travel agents that have that type of a provision in their contracts with the hotels. We believe that they soften competition, and in the event that we find that the commitments that have been proposed after we have gone through consultation, assessed the representations that we've received, and discussed with our commission members, if we believe that they are inadequate, we would have the ability to go back to them and ask them to strengthen their commitments to us. In the event that we are unable to reach a resolution that satisfies us and that we think addresses our concerns, we would have the ability only to take the enforcement action of issuing a warning notice to the to the online travel agents, because the conduct in which they've engaged is not known, is not considered to be serious anti-competitive conduct. And if it's not serious anti-competitive conduct, we aren't able to seek a pecuniary penalty. So that would be the recourse that would be available to us if we ultimately concluded that the commitments were insufficient. In terms of our ability to pursue online travel agents for provisions or similar provisions that they have in their contracts with overseas accommodation providers, we do not have jurisdiction to pursue those, because our jurisdiction is essentially territorial. It would be to the extent that they are affecting or entering into contract terms with local hotels, but we would not have extraterritorial jurisdiction over that in other countries.
What about advertising that in Hong Kong? May I add that this is a cross-boundary question. We have been endeavoring to liaise with overseas counterparts to come up with cooperation agreements. So this is not a problem unique to Hong Kong. We hope to be able to address some of the problems. Mr. Kenneth Leung.
To the Competition Commission. As an economist myself, I like to look at things from a different perspective. I just want the Commission to confirm that you have done a lot of work on petrol oil prices, of course. Generally speaking, you are happy that there is no indication of an existence of a cartel in Hong Kong. That's what I want you to confirm to this panel. And second, of course, if I look at the oil petrol prices or the market from a different perspective, if there are a lot of suppliers supplying homogeneous products, and I won't be too surprised if all these products command the same price. Because if you look at, for example, in another market like the daily newspaper, they have to compete each other and they cannot afford a higher price than others. So that is what I'm looking at this market scenario from a different perspective.
The second question is directed at Mr. Wong, the Secretary for the Environment. What I heard between your lines is that, well, of course, more often than not, the government will not admit to certain policies, say, for example, high land price policy, high oil price policy. Is it one of the policies that is in existence and is something that Hong Kong would like to use to keep the number of vehicles down? The first registration tax in Singapore is double that of Hong Kong. If there is such a policy, don't hide behind it. Tell us. Maybe you say to us that by 2030, you will put a prohibition ban on petrol cars. If you want to travel, you use electric cars, or you travel on public transport?
What we drew a conclusion on was that there was no evidence that we could find, not that there is none or there was none, because we need to have the data. If we are not supplied with the data, we cannot draw a conclusion. So that was the result and our finding at that point. Certainly, it was not an issue of no cartel. It was an issue of not being supplied with the requisite data and information. In terms of your reference, which I found extremely apt, and that is, if there is one single business model and everybody is applying the same business model, there is really no difference in terms of how they do business and where they set their price level. And this is an issue that is compounded by government policy as well as by government infrastructural restriction. And the rest, of course, I'm sure you're familiar with. Thank you.
局長。主席，我諗最
Secretary, let me focus on the last question of Mr. Leung. We have invited the Council on Sustainable Development to have public engagement. One of the topics is that in order to combat global warming, how to phase out conventional fuel vehicles. We're compiling the information and we will formulate the policy. In a lot of places, there are policies set to phase out conventional or old vehicles. I asked you whether you're using high oil prices to curb the growth of number of vehicles. In Hong Kong, the government encourages people to use public transportation. That's our policy. Mr. Roy Kwong, we're here to talk about the report of the work of the Competition Commission. I'm afraid that the focus will only be on oil prices because the oil prices in Hong Kong are one of the highest in the world. Drivers complain non-stop. From a survey, we found that for per liter, oil prices is about $16.10. Our prices are higher by 20% than others, and we're the highest in Hong Kong. And they said that they use free on-board prices instead of using indicators as, say, U.S. Crude oil futures. The secretary said that we don't have refinery and we rely solely on importation, and there is a time lag. We use refined oil. But how can you convince the public? From the beginning of the year, there has been a cumulative drop of 17%. But for us in Hong Kong, there's only a drop of 7.8%. It is the truth that prices increase faster than they drop. Well, the Competition Commission have no information to use in order to deal with the problem. There is nothing they can do. Just tell us, when will drivers see a price drop when they go fill their car? As soon as you hear that prices increase faster than they drop, you know that it is unreasonable. There is an error in your policy. Can you explain to us? When will this problem of oil prices increasing faster than they drop be resolved?
Well, Chairman, we have answered repeatedly. If we compare with Singapore, which is quite similar to our market, and we have been using a lot of refined oil, same as Singapore. And in the recent months, the drop of the oil prices is equivalent to $1.7 in Singapore, whereas in Hong Kong, we have urged the oil companies to reduce their prices, and in the past month they have reduced 11 times, and then the current month they have reduced 8 times. So altogether they have reduced the price by $1.5. For Singapore it's $1.7. For us it's $1.5. And still, given that we are still urging the oil companies to further reduce their prices. But we have to understand that because in Hong Kong we're using refined oil, there will be a time lapse. We need to import the oil. But we believe that this is the right direction. For councillors and also government, we are all having the same mind and heart. We want to strive harder to answer the needs of the consumers, and we will continue to urge the oil companies to lower the prices. Well, I compare the Hong Kong situation with Singapore because it's more objective, and this is data that we could draw reference from. Well, Secretary, the government is not working hard enough. We are just worried that the government is being too gullible, and you can easily take in what the oil companies said, but this is a cruel fact that the oil prices are going up more quickly than coming down. Can you have more concrete plans telling us how you are going to solve this problem? Any supplement? Well, I think this is the end of the meeting. But Mr. Holden Chow has raised a motion, but because of the limitation of time, we cannot handle this at the meeting. Perhaps Mr. Chow could go through the motion quickly. Yes, I have raised a motion and supported by Ms. Elizabeth Quat, but this is the motion is about we want to urge the government to address the issue about the problem of oil prices going up too quickly and coming down too slowly. Okay, once again, we'd like to thank Ms. Anna Wu for heading the Competition Commission. You have done a great job, and we would also like to thank you for attending this the meeting today. There are a lot of things, and also you have let us know very clearly that there are a lot of things that Competition Commission could have done. However, it would need the support and cooperation of the government in order to carry out its tasks. Especially on the area of oil prices in Hong Kong, this is government-led. The issue is government-led, and from the Commission's point of view, you have pointed out that it's a market failure regarding oil prices in Hong Kong. Well, thank you very much. If there is no other further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everybody.